one. Alright, welcome back to another episode of WittyBantr. Your hosts Nabil, Anika, and Daniel are here, and our special guest today is Hassan Shah. Hassan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So, how do we want to transition
Wait, what
from
about us? You left us out.
No, he did mention.
Oh, did he?
Okay. We are here.
Okay.
Are your headphones working?
Sure. No, I haven't been paying attention.
We are here, and I guess for our viewers' sake, the reason why we're so upbeat, we've had some bantering going on before
Behind
the
the
show,
scenes.
behind the scenes.
Pay for premium to see that.
But we are excited to have Hassan here today. He's a well-traveled, kind of creative person, and will, as we mentioned, Hassan, will let you take charge of what you would like to share with us.
Bollywood buff as well.
And a Bollywood buff, a movie buff, the range of all kinds of creative. So you decide what you would like to share with us.
Sure.
How should we start?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can talk about how last week the four of us also met at a literary event where a passage of Anika Auntie's upcoming book was read. And we all really, really enjoyed that, and have also been discussing certain parts of it throughout the week in preparation for today's episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can start with that, if you don't mind.
Let's do that.
So I know that even at the event and ever since, we've been talking about a certain phrase from the passage that really stood out to me, and I guess to you guys as well, which was this concept of a perfect prayer. And instead of paraphrasing it, we have the author with us, so maybe you can give context to the listeners of how that got brought up.
Well, the story is about a young girl who does not have parents, and she's hoping that having a family or having a home will give us a perfect life. And she's been advised that if she's going to pray, she should make sure that she follows the protocol for prayer, and only then will her prayer be heard. And so in that same context, in a slightly different angle, just the other day or yesterday, we were watching this brilliant movie called The Gate to Eternity. And so as Hassan brought up this concept of the perfect prayer, and I'm interested in thinking what was going through his mind when he thought of the perfect prayer. But what also engaged me with the movie that we were watching yesterday about Van Gogh, with the idea of the gate to eternity and the concept of prayer in relation to foreverness or eternity. So those were the two thoughts that were going through my mind as I was thinking of our conversation today. But I would like to throw it back to Hassan and say, so Hassan, what were your thoughts about the perfect prayer?
So I've been thinking about it throughout the week, and I think my thoughts have changed over the course of the week. I think the first couple of days I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the irony of it all, of how we are always told that the prayer is that one thing of religion that we have, and it's sacred, and it's individual, and it's our own, and we can kind of use that to communicate with God in whatever way we want. So it was just ironic seeing this concept of a perfect prayer, of how there's like a rubric you have to follow to get like an A+ on this prayer concept. So yeah, that was interesting to think about the irony of it all. But then kind of yesterday and maybe like a few days later, I was thinking of whether there actually is irony in it, because with irony there's kind of this assumption of that's how it just happened naturally, it was kind of coincidental. But then I was thinking maybe it's not ironic, maybe it's more that and I know we said we wouldn't talk about religion, so cut me off.
But no. This is this is the context of literature.
Exactly.
Because I'm pretending my book is literature.
Of an honorary author.
So then I was just thinking that maybe this concept of the perfect prayer resonated with me because it's something that a lot of people, I think, can relate to, and how we think that our prayer should be perfect. And maybe that's because the context of the book was kind of how you have these people, and then sometimes you can go to them because you think that they're more religious than you are, and their prayers will be heard and answered. Maybe the possibility of that happening is higher than the possibility of your prayer being answered. So maybe there's this notion that we feel the need to have other people pray for us because our prayers won't be answered because maybe we're being judged too much. You know, maybe
I thought that aspect was super interesting because I feel like there's parallels in religion and even like I'm sure in like company cultures of like idolizing one person where maybe
Yeah.
they're the same. It's not like they're any
There's a
bigger.
power differential as well. It's kind of
Yeah.
who has more power
And like, why
Yeah.
does this person have power?
and esteem,
Yeah.
and people look up to them.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I think there's also like a notion of insecurity involved, where you're just so insecure about your
Yourself.
own stature in God's eyes, and you're like, oh, God must love that person more because he's a more devout religious person or more Muslim than I am, and so I want him to pray for me because then maybe the prayer will be answered.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of the prayer
perfect
in this
prayer.
concept? Just a prayer in this context.
The concept is that she wants to achieve something. She wants something,
And what is that?
She wants a family, and she wants belonging, and she wants a home.
Okay, so that's what one would pray for, and the
Eh,
perfect prayer would have all those things.
The perfect prayer, she needs to follow, and she's guided to follow certain ways, as in any ritualistic prayer, you follow some kind of ritual of how things are done. But what I find interesting is that you're connecting it also to this concept of within the company setting or within the community that we're in, is that sometimes you have individuals who impose their power, and other times we allow them and we encourage them to impose their power as human beings. What is it about us as individuals, as human beings, that we feel we belittle ourselves to allow others to take on a greater power?
Or
I mean,
just,
yeah, go ahead.
like the sense of like not knowing what the right answer is. Maybe that kind of ignorance can make you feel weak, and then you're looking. Maybe you kind of give another person power because you're hoping that this person has the answers. I don't know. That's my guess.
Yeah, I also think that maybe even in the context of the way it was written in your book, we're always told not to do this because it's wrong, but then we still end up doing those things anyways, despite believing that that is wrong. So just as an example, like we're told alcohol is forbidden, but it's like, oh shit, I had a drink last weekend, now God's not going to listen to me. So it's like, now I need somebody else to pray for me because or it could be any of those things. It could be like, oh shit, I had sex last week. So
Yeah.
it's like, whatever, like I'm not saying, it's just whatever is, we're given these lists of things that we're not supposed to do.
Yes.
And a part of us believes that to our deep core, where this is like, these things are actually wrong, I'm not going to do it.
Well, clearly you're a true believer.
It's questionable. It's debatable. But then a part of us is also just like, I'm still going to indulge in these activities, and somehow or the other I find myself
I'll just
indulging in this.
Forgive myself after.
But then it's just like, now I'm at the bottom of the totem pole of these like list of people who God is going to listen to, So
But do we do that to ourselves? Do we allow that to happen to ourselves because we engage with that narrative that society or our culture or the group of people that we engage with has allowed us to control how we think? Have we chosen to be part of that story where we are at fault? And we let the faults that others have identified be the true fault, as opposed to, I like that term, a true fault.
perfect.
See that,
True
End of the
fault.
book.
That is not really a fault. It's
Yeah.
artificial fault.
I think some of that is, humans of the past. Obviously religions have come up because we're trying to seek some sort of truth. But then along with that are these rules that you have suggested, and maybe that's just some of those rules are what one group of people think. They believe that that's how humans should behave, but that's maybe one aspect of the kind of bigger picture, and so sometimes those things get attached and then
Yeah.
change over time. But then there's still other aspects that maybe still hold weight that can continue to move forward. And actually, there are a few live questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and
Oh,
read those here. Timur is asking, what is wild boar cane field? Well, I think there's a few words missing in there.
You wanted the question out so fast.
But we do have the author sitting right here, so maybe you want to answer that
Or
one.
is it a secret in the book?
No, it is actually the wild boar in the cane field is a metaphor, but it's also real. It's a novel, and the wild boar in the cane field is something that the people in the village are scared of, but it is an unknown that they are scared of. The boar itself is like human beings caring for its young and caring for its family. The boar itself would probably look at humans in the same way as the humans look at the boar. So I don't know if Temur was asking a literal question or a figurative question.
Maybe he didn't even know what the book was.
But I have provided both.
And so for people who can't read the question, so that's the title of the book.
That
yes,
is
that's
definitely
yes.
the title of the book. Thank you. Yes.
And then we also have Munam Rana here. Does prayer also represent hope? Although that might have been in context with something we were talking about earlier, because the question was asked earlier.
But we can ask our guest if he would like to respond to that
does
question.
prayer also represent hope? Sure.
I think prayers can represent different things for different people, and for some, I think it definitely represents hope. If they have that faith that, hopefully I'll make a prayer and it can lead to. I think for some, prayers can also just represent strength. If they feel completely just helpless and in this very difficult situation, then they feel that at least if I've said a prayer, I've done something on my part. So then maybe God or the universe can help me after I said this prayer in achieving what it is that I want to achieve. And I guess that's also hope. Strength and hope, I guess, in those contexts kind of go hand in hand. But what do you guys believe?
Well, I feel, and as I was going for my walk this afternoon and I was thinking about our discussion today, and I thought, we're all a group of fairly well adjusted, depending on, it's all relative, but fairly well adjusted adults living in a fairly well developed country in the Bay Area, which is liberal and which has, we live comfortable lives basically. And what happens when you are living a comfortable life and you are in good standing, financially, physically, and mentally, and so on, is that sometimes one cannot anticipate the challenge of those who do not have all of that support or the comfort around them. And in those situations when the only hope is prayer sometimes, and that is key to my book as well. It's, people live their lives in what they have around them, and not everyone can leave the environment that they're in, or not everyone is born into an environment that is necessarily provides a fulfilling opportunities for fulfillment. So the answer to the question for me is yes, prayer is a way of creating hope, and it probably stands out more for people who are more, hopeless, and not in the word of hopeless meaning that they have no hope. It's they have less hope than others.
I would say it's like a little bit of that, of kind of giving hope, and also I guess giving more control, because I read an article on like the comparisons between sports and religion, and how, well, one, it's obviously like team building and having a flag and representing, who you are, creating an identity, but also having that joint sense of accomplishment when something good happens. So I guess in sports, if your team wins, you feel like you've won, even though you didn't really contribute to the
sense of
to the actual
accomplishment.
team. Yeah. And then maybe in religion, it's like if something good happens as a community, you felt that all your prayers have helped in some way. So
Yeah, I've never been much for prayer or meditation, but I would imagine it's a good way to block out kind of everything else and then kind of focus like internally and try and answer questions that you have, and try and reach some sort of peace of mind. But I could imagine, so I've been kind of thinking about focus recently, like if I want to like do something, let's say my programming, and a lot of times I get distracted, I go on my phone, watch YouTube videos, and I try and think like how is there a way I could just focus, not with like drinking coffee or something, but just mentally, just like have some sort of switch that makes me more productive. And now I'm steering the conversation into maybe an open question. Do you guys have any thoughts on maybe prayer or meditation helps people focus, or what are your guys' strategies to focus on something that you need to work on?
I was wondering if I could bring this up again back to Hassan.
Okay.
Because you recently made a comment that you were talking about, you're very interested in and have always been a huge student of the creativity in movie making, and you have written some short stories that I had the opportunity to read, and I don't know what you ended up doing with them, but you were able to capture the nuance of characters, which are similar to some of the characters that I have written in my book. And so I know you've been teaching, and that's, I would argue, a very creative way of expressing yourself.
I agree.
So you've got this whole range of creativity that you've been involved in. How do you stay focused? And now your current work, which is not teaching, and I don't know a lot about it, but which of those 4 areas that I know about would you like to address and talk about focus and creativity?
Well, I definitely watch a lot of movies, which has always kind of been my entry into this creative world. I remember when we were all very young, everyone else would be into like PlayStation and basketball and stuff, and I was like, oh, it's not my thing. I'd rather just go home and watch a movie. And I think
you were a trailblazer.
I think over the years, even the range of movies that I've been watching has expanded and gotten much broader. I mean, I was, and I still am, a huge Bollywood fan. But even within the context of Bollywood, it went from being like, I love these like mainstream, loud, colorful movies with lots of songs and dances, and then even the concept of music and dance was very creative in those movies. But then more recently, there are movies that come out of India and a couple out of Pakistan as well that focus more on the lives and the stories of characters that don't really make it in these big budget movies that appeal to the masses and everything. And then having even moved back to San Francisco area recently, I've been watching a lot of movies that are more American or even British, but more independent, and they are very focused on the stories and building the characters. And some of these things they're not even very plot driven. Sometimes I watch movies and people are like, oh, what was it about? And I struggle with answering that, because sometimes it's just like you're just a fly on the wall following the lives of these characters and just watching their day-to-day motions and stuff. And I realize that that's something that I appreciate doing, because I've kind of gone back and forth between living in the Bay Area and Lahore. And that's kind of what I was doing when I was in Pakistan, whether it was when I was a student there in high school or more recently when I was teaching there. And I just think that I was a lot more exposed to people when I was there as compared to here. I think over here it's very easy to get stuck in this, 9 to 5, and then you come back from work and you're very tired, and you go to sleep just so you get energy to do the exact same thing the next day.
Yeah. Unless you have a group of people who like to do some witty bantering.
Exactly, which is why I'm here.
Thank you.
But no, I think in Pakistan it was you're definitely exposed to a lot more people inside the house even and outside the house. And my workspace there was very, very different than any workspace I've had here in the Bay Area. And I don't know, I think just seeing things from different perspectives and being in a situation, sometimes even being in a room and just looking around and seeing that, there's a big event happening right in front of you, but all these people around you are viewing it very, very differently, and it means many different things for them. In Pakistan, that could even be like a big wedding, I mean, when you go to a wedding, it's this lavish event, lots of money is spent. It's all about like, the jewelry and the makeup and the clothes and all that and the dances and all that. But then you also have people who've come to this wedding, maybe it's the drivers or, sometimes the nannies or domestic help, and it means something very, very different for them. And so, yeah, that's something that's always just struck me, kind of being sensitive to these things and cognizant of them. And I also watch a lot of interviews of Bollywood celebrities. And so recently there was this one Bollywood director whose interview I was watching. Her movie came out 2 weeks ago, Gully Boy, and it's a great, great movie. Also very about the creative field. And she said the same thing, that she was actually saying that when she writes her movies, because she's also one of the writers of them, she doesn't like using characters as just a prop in the frame. Like you could have a couch be a prop, but if you're going to have a character in the frame, she wants to flesh out his or her character, because everyone comes with stories and perspectives and emotions and feelings. So that's something that's always kind of called to me, and if and when I do write, I try to think about that instead of just thinking about a creative plot. I might keep my plot very simple, but then I might say, okay, if I bring in the characters into this, what is the character arc going to look like? I don't want the character to just be one-dimensional. What kind of layers can I add to the character? But then you also have to have these layers connect to each other. You can't just give a character a certain characteristic just for the sake of, oh, look at me now, I'm a great writer. It has to make sense with holistically with what you're doing.
It sounds similar to like two movies I think of, Get Out and then Black Klansman. Have you seen both of those?
I have seen both of those.
So those both have, would you say, like they talk about the topic of race, but Get Out I feel is a bit more subtle, and as you were suggesting, like not everything is fully fleshed out, and you can kind of, after watching it, analyze what you think about different things, whereas Black Klansman is very much like just one direction, and I think it becomes less interesting for that reason.
Right.
But I also feel like the movies that you're talking about, it's not necessarily a plot where it's like build up, build up, build up, and then something happens. Is it more of like a movie where it's like the characters themselves are progressing, but like there's not necessarily a climactic moment in the movie?
Right. Yeah, I think it's very subtle. I think there might even be, a big climax, and there might be a big climactic moment, but it might be, you might miss it if you weren't able to just get inside the head or the psyche of the character. Which I think is so amazing, because then when, like, each person watching this movie can have a different experience. Like, one person can watch the movie and just not relate to the character at all and be like, nothing happened in that movie. Whereas somebody else might watch it, relate completely, feel like they understand the character and they're actually inside the shoes of this character, and be like, wow, that was an experience, and that was an emotional roller coaster. I think that kind of experience where it's unique for everyone happens less when movies or books are more plot driven than character driven, because then I feel like things are more spoon fed to you. Everyone can kind of talk about the movie or the book the same way. I don't know if you guys agree, but that's just how I feel.
So on that note, what...
And really quick, Faisal Shahid is here, and he says, I'm going to watch Gully Boy tonight! Exclamation mark.
I don't know if you're saying that just after listening
to
it.
No, he watches a lot of Bollywood.
Oh, it's absolutely phenomenal, and you're going to love it. And you're going to want to be a rapper after. So just...
Really?
It's actually about how somebody in India becomes a rapper. And it's a very cathartic process. He's not.
So, but what were you going to...
I was going to ask the question about... you've talked about music and dance and character, and has there been a movie that was created which has all those elements, that has fulfilled all those needs that you have from a movie, and or do you think you would like to create that movie which has that combination of all of those key things?
Those are great questions. So I actually just watched another Bollywood movie this morning. I watch a lot of movies. It was called Soan Chidiya, and it was very interesting because I think the use of music in Bollywood, and maybe even the use of dance in Bollywood, is always something that's looked down upon, and people just say, like, that movie's so stupid, they randomly break out into song and dance, what's the point, what's that? So Soan Chidiya did not have any dances in it, but it did have music, and some of that was background music, and some of that was not background music, it was very much in the foreground. And I actually loved that, because I think it just lifted up whatever was happening on screen. I think the lyrics were very poetic, and they were very much in sync with what the characters were feeling. And it just adds another layer to what's happening on screen. It was a very emotional movie. Again, I mean, these characters they have a lot. They come with a lot of emotional baggage. And sometimes it's just interesting to take a pause and then just watch them and watch their expressions and watch their actions. And what you're actually listening to is just music, sometimes with no lyrics. And sometimes even just the music can move you. And I think that's such a great blend of creativity, because otherwise music and film, you would assume they don't go hand in hand. And then there's a poetry element in it as well. So I just think it really sometimes adds so much to scenes in movies.
Like,
That's true.
audio cues in general seem
Yeah.
to like create an environment. I was thinking of Dunkirk. Even though like the plot of the
great
movie,
example.
you know that you know what happens.
Yes,
It's
yes.
like not, and even if, when you watch the movie, you think like, okay, well,
And shout out
yeah,
to your
they
favorite
just keep
actor
losing.
here as well.
oh yeah, Tom Hardy. But I feel like they did a really good job at the using audio to
Oh,
kind of
yes,
create
yes.
emotion.
Yeah.
I also really
versus-
liked Interstellar, like the music,
Yeah.
the soundtrack to
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was
Right,
like,
right.
whoa.
No, but what's
Or the-
so interesting is in all three of these examples, both of those and this Indian movie, the filmmakers and the entire team that came together to make this movie, they're evoking emotions out of you and using so many different creative mediums. Whether sometimes it's the dialogue, sometimes it's the way things are shot. All three of these movies were shot very aesthetically, and that added a lot to how you view the movie. And then it's also the music. So and it's interesting that all these things can come together, evoke emotions out of you in different ways, and then all three of these were like very emotional experiences watching the movies, which I feel with a lot of the movies I watch.
That's true.
So I was on that same walk where I was reflecting on movies and such. I was also wondering about how, whether it's literature or stories or movies, are a version of extreme sports, kind of put you on the edge, but you know that you're still safe. Do the movies that you watch also put you on, and yes, they have a cathartic moment, but it's also your life is comfortable, and you're in a movie theater, and you know you're safe, but you need that adrenaline rush of watching somebody else not being safe or go through emotions.
Or
Yeah,
extreme
my friend and I were recently talking about, so we watched three of the movies that were nominated for Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. It was Roma, Shoplifters, and Capernaum. I don't know if I pronounced the last one correctly. But with each of them, they were about individuals with a lot of struggles in life. And like you said, we're very privileged, and the individuals in those movies were not. And then again, you know, people ask you how you feel about these movies, and it's just so patronizing to be like, that was sad, or you know, that was depressing, because that was somebody's reality that was portrayed on screen. So that's something I actually struggle with a lot, where it's, even when I was watching these movies, I had the comfort of, you know, a nice seat and whatever snack I got and all that kind of stuff, and I knew that as soon as the movie's over, that shuts off for me and I can enter my life, but that world still exists for the characters in the movie. So I actually don't have an answer to your question. It's something that I've been grappling with for a while, but maybe there just is no answer. It's you know, these movies are made with the intention of telling stories and showing the perspectives and narratives of these characters for just a certain amount of time. And once that's done, yes, you can still process things and these characters stay with you for a while, but then you do enter, you know, your own life.
Yeah, I guess it depends if you're watching movies for entertainment or your movies are a way to get a message across, to provoke some sort of action.
I was going to ask about, so on the entertainment genre, there's a subreddit specifically for Bollywood Realism. And I was wondering, I don't even know if you watch those kind of movies, but like, I wonder how that came up, where these Bollywood movies basically have these very extreme, like, weird, unrealistic, like, action scenes. And so, like, they keep posting, like, clips of those.
Padmavat has,
Yeah, like very like over the top of guys like on a
Jumping
helicopter,
off.
jumping off a helicopter into an airplane.
It's actually
like,
very funny.
yeah, it's like hilarious. But I'm
Yeah,
wondering,
yeah.
like, are these just like directors competing to make the more extreme scene, or like is it just kind of entertaining? I don't know.
I actually think it all comes down to dollars and cents. There's a huge audience for these kinds of movies in India and the whole world, and these movies are actually competing with each other to break box office records and stuff, which is very unfortunate because most of them are extremely shitty. To put it lightly.
We do have one of our viewers who's amused by your language.
Two more.
I will say that
that's your favorite word, I think.
Oh, shitty.
In different forms.
We have no sponsors, so you can say whatever you want.
I'm actually just trying to censor myself. I consider that to be no. I'll just throw that in there every now and then.
So they're like basically competing with each other to make it more entertaining, I guess.
I mean, these movies entertain lots and lots of people worldwide. I actually recently went to go watch one just like that. It was called Simba, and it came out in December. And I watched it in Santa Clara, in the Bay Area. And there was the longest line I have ever seen for any movie in my life. And I mean, I've watched all like the Lord of the Rings here, and people get very excited for that. But the line for Simba was just going insane. India Waves is this news channel, and they do like Saturday morning shows. So their news reporters were there to interview the people, and people in line were doing the signature dance for Simba, and then they were on TV, and then the movie started, and like some of the dialogues I also watched it opening day, so I don't know if people are like that after that, but people are just hooting and cheering, and they're like out of their seats. It's insane, it's out of control, but I absolutely just loved that experience. It was, it was comedy on screen, comedy live. It's just everything.
Do you think the directors, are they okay if people are wanting to watch this movie because it makes them laugh, and do they have the intention of this is supposed to be serious or something? And what are your thoughts on that?
So what I love now is there are a few Bollywood film critics who have a lot of following, like Anupama Chopra, Rajiv Masan. They have hundreds and thousands of followers on YouTube. So before any movie releases, they interview actors and directors, and some of the questions that they've been asking them now is things like, your movie was really misogynistic, what do you have to say about that? And directors just have to sit there awkwardly and answer. So Simba, actually, Anupama Chopra called the director after the movie release, and she was like, I hate the way you portray women. Please explain to me what you were thinking. And they've both of these critics have done this for movies, many movies in the past couple of years, and they've even called actors and been like, you've signed the movie of a director who made a very misogynistic movie last year. Please explain yourself.
Jesus.
So it's whether these directors and actors actually care, I don't think so, because their movies are minting money. But at least in that moment when they're in that seat and this film critic, and they know that this video is going to go on YouTube and get hundreds and thousands of views, at least in that moment you could see it on their face. And I mean, these critics are also asking actors like, what makes you think you can charge more for a movie than a female actress? And in that moment they're kind of sitting there like, oh shit. I just love that look on their face. I think directors and actors are starting to care about things like that a little bit more because they're being questioned about it much more now than they were several years ago. So hopefully that will also. I mean, Bollywood movies now are even being questioned about, like, in the 90s, you guys would show this hero who was just adamant about getting this girl that he was in love with, and she kept on saying no, and he kept on going, and they're just like, this is encouraging, people stalking and stuff. And yeah.
I also thought, well, I guess there are parallels in Hollywood too with what is it, Transformers?
Yeah.
Like, I remember I watched the original one. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of entertaining. And I watched another one. I was like, what's going on here? But they ended up making like millions of dollars in the box office. So I was like, I guess
that's all.
It's all just
Michael,
just for big explosions.
Michael said that huge audience is Ajit Punj. And then Faisal says the line for the movie at URI at AMC Mercado was the longest line I've ever seen in my life a few months ago.
Yuri?
Yeah, which is interesting because AMC...
What'd you say?
I said URI.
AMC Mercado actually it's an American film theater. It's AMC, so they have like 20 screens, and it's supposed to be playing like mostly American movies. But yeah, the longest lines are always for Indian movies, which is great. I
made a comment I forget what we were talking about, but I made a comment that said Well, once you like release your creative endeavor, your art piece, like it's no longer yours anymore. It's now and that kind of relates to what I was saying, where maybe some of these directors, they intend for their movies to be a bit more serious. For whatever reason, they can't afford proper special effects, and then people kind of come intentionally to maybe laugh at these things. What are your guys' thoughts on how you feel about your whatever you create, and then the idea of once you put it out there, it kind of is no longer yours in a sense?
I feel like that's pretty much the plot of The Room, or I don't know if you've seen it. It's basically like the worst disaster artist made.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's basically like a really bad movie, like acting wise, but the director, Tommy Wiseau, made it so that it would be serious and taken seriously, but it's just like laughably terrible acting.
It's become like a cult.
And it's become so it's become a cult, and everyone like watches and memorizes the lines and goes to laugh and I guess be part of the movie. But now the director is kind of flip-flopped because he initially wanted to be serious, but now he's joined in on the interpretation. Yeah, he's embraced the meme of the movie, I guess. But I don't know if there's any like how it would translate.
Well, I would imagine
it'd be kind of hard as a creator.
Yeah.
As in, like, if you didn't have the intention of some sort of meaning that other people got out of it, I can see it's easy to probably hold on and be like, no, like that's not what this means. But then
that's the fear of putting things out there, then, isn't it? Because you know that somebody will interpret it in a different way. It might be the language, it might be just lost in translation kind of thing, whether it's cultural or whatever.
Right.
So that, I think, is the fear sometimes of putting something out there, is that it will be interpreted in a different way, and that's why sometimes artists and people who are creative feel targeted, because if their creation is like their child, they might take it personally, or if it's part of themselves. And I guess on a lighter note, then you shouldn't take yourself so seriously.
And how does that affect the way would that affect the way you create?
Self-censorship?
I don't know. Just that, like, okay, I might have some sort of intention here, but I know people are going to take it a different way. Do you think that would change the way somebody works?
If they still liked it, I wouldn't mind. Like maybe if they interpreted like your book or my book, if I ever had one, differently than how I intended, but like they still enjoyed the book, then I wouldn't mind.
So kind of that movie that I was referring to yesterday, from The Gate to Eternity, Van Gogh's paintings were not appreciated by the people of his time. And his brother still collected them and made sure he was an art dealer, but nobody really wanted those paintings. And at least in the movie, they keep showing how Van Gogh himself says that this is a gift that I have received, and I am interpreting the world through my eyes, and it's a different kind of interpretation, but no one else felt that it was a credible way to interpret the world, and now of course it is. And I think somewhere there's a line where he says maybe this is not for this time, but it's for people in the future. So what was your question?
I think I was just throwing out
the idea of someone interpreting your work differently. Like, would you feel offended if someone?
Would you work differently? Would you do things differently if you come in with the expectation that even if I say this is what I mean, it's going to come out differently? Yeah, but I guess it probably wouldn't.
Let's say if someone like read your book and you interpreted, or you had a theme and way, and then everyone loved the book for a different reason that you didn't even think of, would you?
Or they hated it for a reason that I had not thought of.
Would you cater your next book to what people reacted to in the first one, or would you just kind of continue?
I guess you wouldn't know, right? You didn't know the first time. What makes you think you're gonna like meet their expectations this time? And actually, why would you even want to meet people's expectations? The whole point of being like a good creative person is to blow people away. I didn't expect that.
Not meet their expectations, but like cater to what they liked about something, right?
Well, that's the difference between creating without considering your audience and just feeling that this is how you need to present the world as you're presenting it, as opposed to the cookie cutter, this is, I want people to engage with it. But I am impressed, Nabil, a question like that coming from you, who really does not care that much about
About what?
About
what
other
other people think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, if you say this witty banter is a creative endeavor, I
Yes.
don't necessarily go through the comments or see how many views. I mean, we do that sometimes.
We
but,
do.
Yeah. But you don't care if you get.
Right.
I think it also has to do with a certain level of self-awareness. Like if you think that you are naturally talented and gifted in whatever you're doing, whether it's writing or filmmaking, and you believe that you're good at it, then even if somebody or a large group of people didn't like the last thing you produced, it wouldn't stop you from producing again. I mean,
It shouldn't.
Or
it shouldn't.
experimenting.
Yes.
Yeah, or experimenting. Yeah.
Unless you're short of money and you need to do something else to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as long as there is talent involved, I mean, because then on the flip side, right, there could be somebody who keeps on writing, or keeps on making movies, and people are just like, bro, you're not good.
Like M. Night Shyamalan.
That's
Well,
also
he
debatable.
He had Sixth Sense, which
And
was good.
Unbreakable,
That's
and
true.
Split.
I
Oh
haven't seen
yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
that's true. He does. Yeah.
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 But I mean,
He does
yeah,
well.
even if he didn't have those movies, then
Yeah.
if there's no talent involved, I mean, that's also subjective. So I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And if it makes you content to produce what you're producing, then go for it. You have to be, if you're creating, that means you're not doing the same as, you're doing something new. And so by definition, you're doing something that is unique. And you just have to try not to be so sensitive. But most major creators, artists are very sensitive.
Sure.
So I guess lesson to them is don't take yourself too seriously.
So
Or don't look at it.
I don't remember what movie it was, but I heard that some movie had been shot with just like an iPhone camera. And with that and like YouTube, have you ever considered like just experimenting with filmmaking, like just with your phone and kind of coming up with movies, since you are interested in movies?
I'm much more interested in writing than I am
okay.
in making films.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I like watching films and I like thinking about them. But when it comes to actually indulging in creative activities, I'm much more of a writer.
Gotcha.
So what kind of film would you create then? Not to
From
put
the
you on-
from the writer's perspective.
From the writer's perspective, if you were what genre, what
So this is a very hypothetical world in which I am
That's
incredibly talented. But I recently read not recently, a year ago, I read Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, and I don't know if it's possible to adapt that into a film that captures all the nuances of the characters. But I just love that the characters were so human, like they had insecurities, and then he even captured this concept of mental health illnesses and conditions, and they were very, very multi-layered characters. I think, in my opinion, that might be easier to capture in a book. But if
So
I
it's
were
contemporary. It's
very contemporary. There's
Okay.
nothing unique about the setting. It just takes place in Japan. It's not like a dystopian society or anything. I think those things don't really. I love watching them. I love reading them. But if I were to create something, that's not something that excites me. I like things that are much more character driven. And then I think like Masan was an excellent Indian movie that came out a few years ago. I wish I could write something like that. That would be brilliant.
Okay, you're giving us a list of movies to watch, because I don't think I've
Then they're
watched
all
any
on
of them.
Netflix. Masan's on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was also thinking when you were bringing up like interpreting a book and making it into a movie, do you think that books are more likely to be misinterpreted than a movie because you have the visual and audio aspect of it?
I think in a book this is my opinion again. I think in a book it's easier to get inside the headspace of a character than it is in a movie. I mean, you really can step inside the shoes of the character and walk around in them easier, I think, in a book. There are movies that do that, but then I feel like then those movies just get categorized as being like art house cinema or indie kind of films. Whereas in a book, you don't really have those categories. So, people can, those kinds of books I feel, for whatever reason, are more widely read than the analogous type of movies are watched.
Would you argue that there is a higher latency reading a book than there is watching a movie? Latency between you and the idea that the author is trying to tell you, show you?
Well, I guess you have more time to.
And I use the word latency in relationship to like a computer. You measure latency in like milliseconds, and if your game is
I got stuck with that word.
Yeah, what?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably have to clarify that.
Sorry. So like in a game, if you have a high latency, that means your game's probably lagging because there's a huge time delay between when you click the button and when something happens on the screen. And I'm curious if reading and watching movies is just a different experience altogether, or watching movies is a more efficient way of digesting people's ideas.
So I have an example that I'd like to share of movie watching that it wasn't the movie, and this is Dr. Zhivago. When I watched it the first time, I thought, what a beautiful love story. And this was before I was married. And then I watched it after I was married, and I was expecting my first child at the time. And the main character in this movie, he is the husband of a woman who is expecting their first child. My attitude towards that movie was so different the second time I saw it. I thought, what the heck? You're married and your wife is expecting a child, and now you're falling in love with this other woman. What the heck did your wife do? I mean, so I don't know if that's latency or if it's,
Well, I mean, I guess if you read that instead of watched it, would that have changed?
I think the story changes depending on where you are in your life, and at least for me that was a change. There are books that I read when I was younger that I would never touch again, because I think, what a waste of time. Why did I waste the whole summer reading Gone with the Wind? And I know that sometimes will sound blasphemous to people, but it was, I was depressed, I was homesick, and I spent the whole summer reading that book. I don't know what I took away from it. Now I look at the main character and I'm thinking, gosh, she's so irritating. Why did I invest that time in it? So I think as a reader or as someone who watches movies, your reaction to a movie and a book can change as you go on through, as you move on to life. There are some that you will always say, this was the best. Piera Maintains is a book that I've listened to and read, and I love it every time I listen to it.
I also feel like since unless you read the book in one sitting, since you have more breaks in between readings, like you're able to digest and see the characters' motives, versus in a movie it's happening so much faster. Like you're only judging the person on the last thing they've done.
I could argue that I am not that focused and I keep changing my mind. I mean, that's just me.
Is that when you're reading or when you're watching, or both?
It could be, well, usually while I'm watching it, if I'm enjoying something like the movie I was watching last night, I thought, this is a slow movie, but I'm enjoying the visuals and I'm enjoying the concept. And then when I got to discuss it the next morning, with two different people, I got to relish it a bit more than I was when I was actually watching it. So.
And what movie was that?
This was the Gate to
Eternity.
Eternity.
That one. Okay.
Michael says books are better. Harry Potter versus Voldemort in the movies was no good. I guess
we never read the Harry Potter.
I don't get the
books.
context.
You were reading it too.
He says Harry Potter versus Voldemort in the movies was no good.
Maybe the
gotcha. Now I understand.
Movie adaptation was worse.
I see. Interesting.
We never read you were going to read it to us. and then we got bored.
Actually, the three of us watched the first movie when it came out together.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
Oh,
I remember that.
I
I
wonder.
remember our dads went to go play golf in the morning. It was a Saturday, and then they came back and they're like, "We got you guys tickets for Harry Potter."
Huh? What, did we like it a lot?
I just think
I
our
don't
dads
remember.
thought they were being cool dads at the
Oh,
time.
okay.
We're gonna take our sons to Harry Potter.
Did you
We
ever
like
read
Harry
Harry Potter?
I have not read Harry Potter.
Oh my
Really?
goodness,
Whoa.
all of us.
No, and I don't say really like, wow, you haven't read it. I for some reason I just thought like
I thought
you
you read
definitely
it,
had
yeah.
Harry
I've
Potter
read-
books.
I've read the first. And
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because they
I'm
were
more-
living with the guilt of never having read a Harry
I
Potter.
mean, there's a lot of books I haven't read.
I was watching too many Bollywood movies in my youth.
Is that the most read series?
It probably is.
Oh, okay.
Too mainstream for us.
We like indie books that only 1,000 people that have read.
And there isn't one out there yet.
So, yeah.
We'll write it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what motivates people to read. So I'm a terrible reader in that I don't read books. But the things I do read are like software documentation. So like how to use a programming language and how to use different functions, and my what would you say? My intention. No, when you want something?
Motivation?
Yeah, motivation. My motivation for reading these documentations is to be able to do something in the programming language. Do you guys have some sort of motivation when you read a book? And why do you think other people just don't have it? Like I don't care to read books like for fun. If there's a purpose to it, if I'm going to solve something, I can read manuals, but that's like the extent of my reading career.
I really like just people watching, and I feel like reading is a very non-awkward and non-creepy way to people
Gotcha.
That's a good way of putting it.
I really like stories.
I do that on
human
YouTube, I
stories.
guess. So
There you
I
go.
creep on YouTube. So.
There you go. No, I just like human stories and seeing what humans are capable of doing and the range of emotions they're capable of expressing. And
For me, there's a level of escapism as well, and I keep reminding myself my life is a good life, but I still like to escape. And at various stages, I mean, I will read books of different places or just lifestyles, which I think, oh my goodness, people live like that? That's so interesting. I wish I would take those risks, but then I don't really want to because I'm too lazy to take those risks.
No.
living vicariously.
Yes. It's a lot of it is living vicariously and thinking, and same thing, people watching but thinking, okay, you can do it that way. Also, sometimes, and now I've found this also mainly with Audible, the way people use language can give you so much pleasure. It's a bit like poetry reading as well, and you think, you put those words together in that way. And I'll never be able to do that, and that's fine because I'm not aspiring to, but it's the language also which fascinates. Now, I also enjoy books with pictures. And one book that I really enjoyed that my father gave me, and it was a Russian fairy tale story, Vasilisa the Beautiful. And the artwork in that book was so beautiful, and I wish I had not misplaced the book. So now my goal in life is to find a similar green cloth covered book of Russian fairy tales with Vasilisa the Beautiful and Baba
This is in
Yaga.
English?
It's an English translation of Russian fairy tales, a classic
Okay.
Russian fairy tales, but the artwork was so beautiful. So those are the three reasons
Why I like reading.
why I like reading. Yes, it could be a 3-paragraph academic essay if you needed it to be.
You also have to have a good imagination, I feel like, if you're trying to
Yeah, I think
create
that's
the
something I
picture.
struggle with,
Yeah.
is like reading words and like picturing them in my head. I don't do that, and I don't know if I missed out on that growth.
Like you read the words literally, but you never
Like I'm one of those guys
paint
where
the
like
picture.
you read it and then like I have to read it again because I have no idea what I read.
That might mean you're reading the wrong stuff.
Maybe.
There are so many different types of books out there.
That's
and,
true.
Yeah, it's
to give
Yeah.
it a
Could
go.
be. What about you, Daniel? What's your...
Yeah, I was actually thinking I haven't. The only reason I started like going back into books was because of the audiobooks. And I guess I kind of struggled with the same thing of like being able to paint the picture. But I guess in high school I was I was interested in reading.
Mm-hmm.
Like
You used to read those books about the treetop, the way they go in the past or something. What was that? The series?
Hardy Boys.
oh yeah, there was
Nabil used to read Captain Underpants.
yeah.
Maybe that explains my lack of growth.
The Flipperama. Yeah,
Wait, which one?
Remember in Captain Underpants?
Oh, they have
had,
the
like,
little comic
flipping thing at the end where it's like it makes
a little picture.
Yeah.
Like animation.
Yeah, I forgot what that was. There's like some treehouse series.
Hassan
but that was,
used to
way
read
back.
those scary books. didn't
Goosebumps?
you?
Oh,
Goosebumps. Yeah.
I also like those choose your own adventure type of.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Did you ever see?
The
Mindbender?
Netflix. I did
Yeah.
watch that. Yeah.
We didn't like it.
Well,
It was
I didn't like it because there's this game called Detroit Become Human, which is essentially it's a video game, but it's the same idea where like you move around, but you get to choose how you react to other people. So it gives you options, and then it kind of all plays out. So that just had way more depth than this. So that's why I didn't like
It's
it.
like an animated movie almost that you can choose how, and they actually any choice you make actually makes a big difference. Where I feel like in what was it, Mindbender? What was
Or
the movie
the
called?
Bandersnatch.
Bandersnatch, yeah. I feel like there was
It was very
one plot that always happened no matter what you made the choice, which is the dad.
Or if you
guy.
made a choice, you'd have to like go back and like do
it over.
keep going
yeah.
until
Either
you
it ends
get the right
there
one.
or you
Right.
Yeah.
I would assume it's the first of its kind. I'm sure they'll make other one that would be better.
That's true.
But it was unique.
It's a good way to experiment.
What do you think
Yeah.
of graphic novels? Because some people who read
I like
graphic novels.
Asterix
Yeah.
and Obelix. Remember that?
Oh yes,
And
that's a fun
Tintin.
one. Tintin.
It's really fun you asked that. When I was teaching English in Pakistan for 2 years, there was a strong push towards having graphic novels, and I was very much against it.
Why?
Strong push
Tell
by
me.
the students? Or?
No, by the other teachers and
Oh.
the heads of the school, and I was very much against it.
Why?
Because I think that they could be a great complement to novels. And even when I say complement, I don't think like 50-50. I think maybe like 70-30. And I think the school was trying to push for more of like a 30-70 flip, where we do like 70% graphic novels and maybe just 30% other stuff. So I was very much opposed to that. I don't know. I think in formative years, it's important to appreciate the act of reading a novel and the different types of novels. You have your classics, you might find those boring, but then you might have contemporary books, those might resonate with you more, and then graphic novels, I just don't find them educational.
What about the Iranian one that you assigned
Persepolis?
Persepolis.
Yeah.
You didn't like that one?
That one I thought was better than
Okay.
some of the other ones I've seen, but again, I actually think like Persepolis or other graphic novels would work in terms of teaching. I think they would work excellently as a complement of something. So first you read a novel, maybe like a war novel or something. You get the students to analyze that and everything, and then you complement it with a graphic novel. Doing a graphic novel instead of a novel, that I was very much against.
Okay.
So what do you think will be? So novels are fairly new in human history. And I always like thinking of, 200 years ago, people didn't used to read novels, okay? And in fact, women were told not to read novels because it would turn make them think.
That's
Period.
it. Yeah, period.
I think if
What do you think will happen 200 years from now?
that's a good question.
It'll be some sort of like, obviously I'm going to go straight to technology. It's going to be some sort of like sensor where you can, I don't know, picture it in your head instantly.
I think to answer that, it would be important to first ask what are the benefits of reading novels then? And then I think the question would be, what are some other ways using technology or other elements of the modern world that we can still instill those benefits just through a different medium?
Is there something that... Munim has a question here.
Oh, Munim says, agree, graphic novels leave less to your imagination.
True.
Okay.
Interesting. The artwork doesn't
Engage.
paint a picture.
No,
Well, as in, like, usually your imagination you create yourself.
Yeah.
If
There's
the
less
features-
words. I actually completely agree with what you said. The use of language has always been something that inspires me. I think a perfect example of that coming full circle, would be
Mhm.
perfect prayer.
Mhm.
So I mean, yeah, graphic novels, you can't appreciate the use of words. You can analyze the artwork, but then maybe I'm just very, very traditional in this way. As an English teacher, do you really want to emphasize having your students appreciate artwork?
That's
Mhm.
true. It's a different class.
Yeah, it's a different class. Yeah,
Yeah.
do graphic novels in your own class.
So that's another question I have. The way we have our public, whether we have all our educational systems, we so separate all of the different skills. What is the benefit of that? And that also is 100-year new of how we learn with different, now you're going to study math, now you're going to study English, now you're going to study biology, and never the twain shall meet, or it won't unless you go to a more progressive institution where
Yeah.
all of these
You're in
skills
European,
are.
Scandinavian countries.
Yes.
I think that, and I mean, none of us are like psychologists or have studied this, but
Oh, we can pretend.
Yeah.
we
we
are.
can pretend
yourself.
Our viewers.
I
to
took
our
one
viewers.
psychology course in
If it
community
wasn't
college.
emphasized already, we are not professionals.
I'm not saying the current education system is anywhere near perfect, but then I think when people do make that argument, they're not shining light on what's happening behind the scenes. So even when you have like a separate class for math and a separate class for English and science or whatever, you are, hopefully, if your teacher's good and the school's good, you are having the students learn certain critical thinking skills, certain soft skills, communication skills, analytical skills, which they're not very much in the foreground. It's hard to test that with the kind of written tests that we give our students. But then does everything have to be so categorized where like here's a 15-minute math lesson and a 15-minute English lesson? I think that's just more for organizational purposes.
Logistics.
Yeah.
Even the testing part, and you can argue that, I feel that testing does not necessarily measure learning.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
The kind of tests that we have currently.
Yes. And why do we need to test people? If you've learned something, are we what is the reason for the test? Is it to give you more opportunity to learn more, or is it to tell you,
It's to prove you're paying attention.
or you haven't learnt enough and therefore we won't let you move on?
I think we have this like filter system, right? Where at the very top, every student is just a drop. And then where you come down into this filter, we're like, okay, you scored X% on this test, so you can come down this path. And you scored like 70%, so you're going to go down that path. And not that I agree with this at all. I think that's just maybe organically or naturally the way it's happened. But then it's the
very
test.
intentionally happened to continue. Oh, at least that's what I think.
Right.
In my humble
the-
opinion.
But I also agree that I feel like in English class you learn more of the creative thinking skills of being able to read something and then everyone in the class has their own opinion on the matter, and they debate ideas, which I feel like would translate well in pretty much any job or any scenario where you're not seeing the perspective of someone else.
You had a good English teacher.
Who?
I don't know. Whoever you
or
did.
you had a good mother who was
Yeah. Well, I
think you did have a good English teacher, a great English teacher.
Miss Camara.
Yeah,
she was good.
Yeah, I guess the problem with tests is, well, the good thing is it's a performance metric. The problem is it can be a very narrow one. So just because people are measuring high on your test, you might be missing a whole array of,
And we see plenty of people
value.
with college degrees, and you think, really?
Yeah, that's true.
And people who don't have higher level of education, whose performance is very different.
But on a positive note, I feel the internet has helped those who maybe have not performed well in the traditional educational system. You can now, there's a wealth of information on all the different types of subjects you're interested in, and you can go online, understand them, and then at least digitally add value in some sort of way and help you.
True. Hassan, will you come back to teaching at any point in your life?
I would really like to. I think the need of the hour now is to be in something that pays more.
Yeah.
But I really, really enjoy teaching. Especially teaching English was a great experience.
I had a question, since we have two English people.
Teachers.
Teachers.
One former, one
Yeah,
current.
yeah. Do you think that sometimes an English class will over-interpret author's intentions or over-interpret something? Because I feel like online there's always the meme of like, oh, it's like a rock. No, the rock means something bigger
Yes,
than what
yes.
you're seeing.
Well,
do you think that that's a problem, or do you think that's kind of like?
Well, teachers are. I think the idea that anything can be a trigger for other ideas and bring about other ideas is good. You know, it's not. I don't think there's a. You can't say this is right. It's very difficult in an English class to say anything is absolutely wrong, because how do you know what the author is thinking if you're talking about the interpretation?
Right.
But you can connect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that how else would you teach students this concept of like surface level thinking versus like hidden meaning, or there might be layers to things, or maybe you could look at things from a different perspective, or you know, like this might make sense the way you're looking at it, but if somebody else views it, he or she would view it differently, and why is that?
Right.
So I mean, even the rock, or even just this concept of metaphors, and yeah, I think it's a great way to broaden the mind of a student. I mean, they might just be like, oh, that's a rock, and then as an English teacher, you might get them to think, well, maybe there's a hidden meaning behind the rock, maybe the rock symbolizes something else. And if you can portray that idea well, then the student leaves learning like, okay, wow, like on the surface it seems like a rock, but I never thought that it could symbolize something else.
Different type of rock.
A different type of rock. Or even the fact that it's like raining outside. You know, like you read that in a book and you're like, oh, it was a cloudy, rainy day, and they're like, okay, cool, the weather was, you know, it was raining, they couldn't go outside and play. But then as an English teacher, you could be like, okay, what else does that symbolize? Maybe it's foreshadowing that something bad is going to happen, or it's a sad. So just many layers.
And if it's monsoon, it's romance.
Right, exactly. Especially in South Asia.
Yes.
I guess in all the other courses, it's almost all literal. Like I can't think of any other course where there are those kind of.
Well, I hear
your
now
interpretation.
in certain areas there is a deeper understanding, for example, in history, political science, and the social sciences, looking at the cultural connection and why you're studying certain things. Even in the hard sciences, people are looking at gender and, you know, perspectives that have not been included because funding for research has not been provided. So the more advanced and more progressive instructors are looking at the nuances, even with math education. You know, why is one way of interpreting, and I don't know the details of, but I do know that the way those concepts, and that's why people are also moving towards teaching statistics as well, to be able to get the nuance of the knowledge rather than saying everything is very literal. That the knowledge creation is based on the societal expectation and priorities, and if the society did not prioritize something, or they left people out, why did that happen? So the politics of education, basically. And I'm rambling on here, so
well, I guess
it's
you
not
get
a
to
witty
question.
banter. It's a ramble.
It's just
It's a boring ramble.
It's a rant.
Well, off that ramble, we've gone over an hour now, so.
All right, time to leave.
So if our viewers want to reach you, is there any way they can reach you online, or they'll just have to?
Website.
Anything you want to plug.
You don't have to.
And you don't have to.
I'm on Facebook.
Catch us on Facebook.
And you like to plug World Peace.
Yeah, World Peace is a great thing. Okay, well, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, talk to you later.
Thank you.